The problem with quiet people is that we're often underestimated. "Oh, you're the soft and silent type," they say with a smile, oblivious to the storm that brews beneath. When you think we won't make waves, that's when we do. I learned this early on. Growing up, I was the observer, the one who listened more than I spoke. In a loud, boisterous household, my quietness marked me as different, almost an outsider, and it wasn't just at home. School was much the same. While other kids reveled in the spotlight, I found solace in the corners, in books, in daydreams. It was a lonely existence, but it taught me something crucial: the power of preparation. Because when quiet people do speak up, when they step out of the shadows, they tend to make quite an impact. People don't expect it. They underestimate the quiet ones. I was labeled introverted, reserved, even shy, but what they didn't see was the steel sharpening within my silence. Each time I was overlooked, each time I was underestimated, it fueled me, honed me. Their expectations became my ceiling, which meant only one thing: I had to rise above them, not to prove them right, but to prove them wrong. It took years to find my voice, to learn when to speak and when to stay silent, to master the art of communication without being categorized as the quiet kid. It was a long journey, but a worthwhile one. Now, when someone thinks they can dismiss me because of my silence, well, they're in for a surprise. They've awoken a giant, and giants, as you know, are not fond of being disturbed. Do you recognize yourself in this story? Are you tired of being overlooked, underestimated, and underestimated? You may not realize it now, but that quiet strength within you is your superpower. Don't let others mistake your stillness for weakness. Embrace your silence. It's where your true power resides. So tell me, where are you listening from right now? If you're in a noisy place, perhaps at a crowded party, listen closely. The quietest corner might be where your strength shines the brightest. Let this story be your reminder that quiet people are not to be underestimated. We may not always show it, but we're capable of surprising even ourselves. Sometimes all it takes is one moment. Just one moment to ignite the flames that burn brightest in our souls. It happened for me at age 26. I'd just moved to Chicago after graduating from Columbia Business School. I landed a job at a prestigious investment firm and life was good. But then came the incident on the 47th floor that changed everything. During a routine office meeting, I shared a business idea that I'd been working on. But instead of taking it seriously, my colleagues burst into laughter. They thought I was joking, but I wasn't. I felt humiliated, embarrassed, and most of all, angry. In that moment, I decided that I would prove them wrong. I poured every ounce of energy and brilliance into my work. Within 2 years, I climbed the corporate ladder faster than anyone expected. And by the time I was 30, I was leading major projects, raking in huge profits for the company. They called me the rising star, the youngest and best in the field. Those who once laughed at me were the first to congratulate me, but their praise meant nothing. I knew I hadn't done it for them. I had proved myself right and shut them up in the process. Did you hear that? Shut them up. Life has a funny way of silencing those who try to silence you. Remember that. Where are you listening from right now? If you're facing doubt or ridicule, hold on tight because your silence is biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to roar. Stay tuned because I'm about to share another story that will inspire you to find your voice. And if you're enjoying these stories, please hit the like button. Your support means the world to me. They never expected me to hit back. They knew my reputation. Everyone thought I'd crumble, that I'd retreat like I always did. But that time I had something different in mind. I owed them an answer, not because I craved their approval, but because their mockery had touched a nerve that ran deeper than my skin. They didn't understand the grit that had molded me, the countless jobs, the calluses on my hands, the quiet nights when the fridge was bare, and I told my kids we'd have cereal for dinner again. They did unsee the strength in my tired bones, or the dreams I tucked away for the sake of responsibility. So I decided to show them. I started small. I took odd jobs around town, fixing fences, power washing decks. I didn't need a lot of money. I just needed to prove a point to myself. I showed up to every job early, and I worked until the task was done right. Slowly, I began to reclaim my dignity, brick by brick, callus by callus, dream by dream. It wasn't easy. Some days my body ached, some days the loneliness hit hard, and some days the memories of sacrifice threatened to pull me under. But then I'd look around and I'd see the changes I was making, not just in my work, but in myself. When they asked, "Where's Eddie been lately?" I wanted to reply, "Just mind your business." But when I actually heard that question, I was doing something I hadn't done in years. I was laughing. And not the bitter laugh of someone who feels cheated, but the genuine laugh of someone who's found a new strength. See, I was building more than just houses. I was building a life on my terms. A life where hard work wasn't something I did in spite of who I am, but because of who I wanted to be. It was a long, slow burn, but bit by bit I started turning heads. People noticed not just the quality of my work, but my confidence. And guess what? It had nothing to do with money. Sure, I was earning enough to pay the bills and put food on the table, but that wasn't the victory. The victory was in the respect. When they looked at me, they saw more than just a guy with calloused hands. They saw a craftsman, a problem solver, someone who took pride in his work. One day, I overheard someone saying, "Eddie's not just some bum off the street. He's got skills. That guy knows what he's doing." And you know what? Those words meant more to me than any amount of money ever could, because in that moment I realized that I had reclaimed my worth. But it wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving myself right. I had shown myself that I didn't need their approval to be worthy. I had shown myself that I could honor my values without compromising. Most importantly, I had shown myself that I could pick myself up, dust myself off, and start again, not for their approval, but for my own. These days, I still take on those odd jobs. I might be a little older and a little wiser, but the satisfaction I get from a job well done is priceless. And yeah, when I hear their surprised voices echoing in the neighborhood when they ask, "What happened to Eddie?" I don't bother correcting them. I just smile and say, "Oh, I'm just minding my own business." And in that smile, there's a lifetime of meaning. It's the smile of someone who doesn't just survive, but thrives, who doesn't just endure, but excels, who doesn't just belong, but contributes, who doesn't just dream, but achieves. You ever heard someone say, "Don't go trying to stir up trouble, kiddo. Some things are best if you just stay out of them"? Those were my dad's parting words as I headed off to college, words that echoed through my whole childhood. Stay out of it. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Let things take their course. Looking back, I think he was right. But back then, all I felt was the weight of his distrust, the belief that the world was too complicated for me, that I didn't have what it took. He told me those things so many times, I started believing him. I retreated into myself, burying my ambitions, my dreams, my very thoughts, pretending I didn't have opinions, that I didn't care. After all, what did I know? I was just a kid. But people like that underestimate the power of quiet. You think quiet means powerless, that no one's paying attention, that nothing's happening. But quiet can be powerful. Quiet can simmer until it boils over. It happened in high school. I was hanging out with a couple of friends, and we got into a discussion about our futures, about our parents, about the stuff you talk about when you're 16. My two friends had plans, ideas about colleges they wanted to attend, careers they dreamed of. Me, I shrugged, pretended it wasn't something I thought about. But after they left, I remember sitting on the curb outside the school, staring at the brick wall, thinking about what I didn't have, what I wasn't allowed to dream of. My dad worked nights, so I grew up mostly with my mum. She filled in the gaps of our lives with day jobs, waitressing, cleaning houses, working security. She never stayed in one place for too long. We moved around a lot, which meant new schools, new faces, new neighborhoods. I changed so many schools that eventually I stopped making friends. The ones that stuck around, the ones that knew my story, left as soon as they could. And I understood that maybe they didn't want their lives to be a jumble of hallways and classrooms, of goodbyes and new beginnings. And that was fine. I was used to it. Besides, I was better off without them. At least, that's what I told myself. Then we moved to this town, to this house, and I found myself going to yet another orientation. I walked into yet another bustling gym, all shiny floors and squeaking sneakers, introducing myself to yet another group of kids. And then I met them. The welcoming committee. They made a point to make me feel at home, to include me, to accept me. It felt different from the usual animosity, the usual snickers and shoves. These kids, they actually invited me to hang out, to sit with them at lunch, to be a part of their group. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe here, in this place, I would finally fit in. I gave them parts of myself that I hadn't given anyone before: trust, loyalty, friendship. And I never imagined it would cost me so much. I see now that every time I speak, every time I express an opinion, I do it cautiously, gingerly. It's like I'm testing the waters, afraid of what might happen if I go too deep. And maybe that's why, looking back, I think my dad was right. Maybe some things are best left untouched, some battles best avoided. But that doesn't mean I have to like it. It doesn't mean I have to accept it. And most certainly doesn't mean I have to let it break me. Because quiet can also be powerful. Quiet can be strength. For a while, I thought about going straight to the leaders, confronting them with what I had found, but Mr. Jenkins shook his head when I shared that thought. They won't admit it, they won't resign, and if you go to the members now, you won't get very far. You need leverage, something that forces their hand. His words echoed what my gut was already telling me. We needed proof, hard evidence of the leadership's wrongdoings. It had to be airtight, because what we were dealing with was a tightly knit group of people who looked out for one another. Plus, the leaders were skilled politicians, able to twist words and situations to their favor. A pattern of negligence was damning, but it wasn't enough to topple them. We needed a smoking gun. While I mulled over Mr. Jenkins' advice, he continued, there's something else you need to remember. They'll try to discredit you. They'll use whatever means necessary to paint you as the problem, not them. Be prepared. His words hung in the air, a warning and a promise. The neighborhood was a fortress built on appearances. As long as everything seemed orderly and prosperous, the leadership was untouchable. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the manicured lawns and polite smiles, there was a network of financial misconduct that had been growing for years. The question was, how could I bring it to light? The answer came during a routine board meeting. I had slipped in easily enough, blending into the background noise of landscaping plans and social calendars. But then the subject shifted to a new development project. It was a proposal I hadn't seen before, one that called for demolishing several homes to make way for luxury apartments. My ears perked up because it involved the very block where Mr. Jenkins and I lived. I knew he was opposed to the development, so I stayed quiet. But when the discussion turned to eminent domain, I couldn't hold back any longer. I stood up, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. What eminent domain? When the murmurs subsided, I continued. This plan, it's not what the community wants. And this process, it stinks of cronyism and greed. Their shocked faces were my first victory. Now I had their attention. I pulled out the files I had prepared, laying them on the table like a carefully laid trap. I've uncovered discrepancies in how our dues have been spent, inflated prices for simple repairs, questionable land purchases. There's even a pattern of funneling money to developers who never deliver. The room erupted in chaos. Accusations flew, voices rising above the din, but I held up a hand for silence. If you want answers, I suggest you look in the mirror. If you want change, start by voting for it. And then I walked out, leaving them to grapple with the consequences of their complacency. That's pretty good. You know what else is good? And now back to our story. Everything still looked serene out in public. Smiles at the market, handshakes at gatherings, laughter floating across porches, surface harmony that masked hidden rot. But I knew the truth. Their foundation was crumbling, and soon it would be impossible to ignore it. The more I uncovered, the more surreal it felt to watch them stand at a podium, speaking of integrity while their foundation crumbled underneath. I didn't confront them yet, not directly. It wasn't the time. Instead, I tucked the knowledge away, each record and each confirmation becoming a piece of ammunition I might someday need. And as I walked back through the neighborhood streets, I couldn't help but notice how fragile it all seemed now. The facade still glittered under the streetlights, but I knew better. The cracks were there, widening each day, and all it would take was the right pressure for the whole structure to collapse. My first move wasn't dramatic. There were no confrontations, no shouting, no immediate fanfare. I wanted it to be clean, precise, undeniable, a stone dropped into still water with ripples that couldn't be ignored. For weeks I'd gathered the evidence, verified contracts, confirmed discrepancies, cross-referenced records. Now the moment to act had arrived. I filed a formal complaint with the town's oversight committee, a document that laid out in excruciating detail the mismanagement I had uncovered. The missing funds, the inconsistencies in property transactions. It was legally sound, factual, and completely procedural. No room for argument, no way to twist the truth. Once submitted, I waited. The first few days were quiet, and I could feel the tension beneath the calm. The leadership acted as though nothing had happened, continuing their public routines with the same polished smiles, but whispers began to curl around them like smoke. Someone noticed a copy of the complaint in the community newsletter inbox. A few neighbors exchanged cautious glances in the grocery line. I saw it in their eyes, the tiny, almost imperceptible shift in posture. The sudden pause in conversations when I walked by. The first stone had turned, and the ripples were spreading. It wasn't long before murmurs grew louder. "Did you hear about the complaint?" One neighbor asked another while tending to flowers in their yard. "I think someone finally called them out." Others nodded, eyes darting toward the homes of the leadership. People were hesitant to discuss it openly, afraid of being caught in a confrontation, yet curiosity propelled them forward. They wanted to know who had dared to step up, who had the courage, or perhaps the audacity, to challenge the status quo. Meanwhile, I remained outwardly calm. There was no need to announce myself. I didn't need to appear heroic or vengeful. My satisfaction came from the fact that the system itself was starting to respond. The complaint had been filed correctly, legally, and officially. It wasn't about ego, it was about establishing leverage, proving that even a single, calculated action could alter the balance of power. They had underestimated me, as always. That was their mistake. By the middle of the week, subtle changes were evident. Board members who had been confident now avoided my gaze during meetings. Contractors who had previously shrugged off accountability began to respond to emails faster, with more care. The community's tone shifted. Conversations once casual now carried weight, an undercurrent of observation, as though everyone sensed that someone had finally shifted the scales. It was a small act, yes, but its impact was undeniable. A single complaint, perfectly executed, had made waves far beyond the dry words on a page. They might not know it yet, but things have changed. They can keep up the facade for a while, pretend that nothing's amiss, but the water's getting murky, and soon they won't be able to keep their heads above the ripples. I started. What do you admire most about our protagonist in this story? Is it their patience, planning, or unwavering determination? Let me know in the comments. Your thoughts matter. They help shape future stories, so don't hold back. Share your opinions and let's keep the conversation going. See you next time. The hiss of the idling engine filled the night air, the rhythmic pulse a stark counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of thoughts in my head. My hands steady on the steering wheel were the only visible sign of the turmoil within. As the neighborhood buzzed with speculation, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. This was only the beginning. I had started with a single, clean stone, but the momentum it created could be built upon. There would be more actions, more deliberate steps, each designed to expose truths and restore balance. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it out of necessity. I was reclaiming what had been dismissed, proving that patience and precision often outweigh loud confrontation. And for those of you following along, I'd love to know, have you ever made a small move that caused a ripple bigger than you expected? By the way, let me know where you're watching from tonight. Always wonder where these stories land. Dante. Forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can follow what happens next, because the first stone is only the start and the lesson is just beginning. My initial lead had come from an unexpected source, a nosy neighbor with a penchant for gossip and a heart of gold. Mrs. Henderson had noticed, just like many others, that Mr. Williams's house was a shadow of its former self. But unlike the rest of the neighborhood, she didn't just see a money pit. She saw a reflection of our community's soul, one that had been neglected and discarded. When I'd shared my thoughts about revitalizing the neighborhood, she'd been the first to rally, offering not just her voice, but her entire Rolodex of local contacts. And tonight, she'd delivered it. Seated in my car outside the bakery, I watched the lights come on inside. In less than an hour, I'd met with a man who owned several buildings in the neighborhood. He'd listened patiently to my concerns and my plans, and by the end, he'd agreed to sell me two of his most troubled properties at well below market value. It was a significant start, but it was only the beginning. Mr. Williams's departure had left a power vacuum that everyone was eyeing, and I was determined to fill it, not with force, but with fairness, not with anger, but with action. Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly. My days were filled with meetings, inspections, and negotiations. My evenings were spent poring over contracts and blueprints, but as the work progressed, so did the whispers. Rumors spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some praised my efforts, others criticized them. But I remained focused, driven by a vision of what could be rather than what was. Then came the day when all eyes were on me. The monthly neighborhood assembly was always a formality, a rubber stamp on decisions already made by the elite few. But this time it was different. With Mr. Williams gone and the future uncertain, the residents were restless. Their questions hung heavy in the air, their faces a mix of anxiety and hope. I stood before them, not as a newcomer, but as one of them, sharing my plans, outlining my vision. Their response was a testament to the power of shared purpose, their faces lighting up with understanding, their voices rising in agreement. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to stir. Long vacant storefronts were leased, derelict houses were renovated, and a community garden sprouted where there had only been weeds. I didn't do this alone. I partnered with local businesses, organized cleanup drives, and encouraged residents to take pride in their homes once more. It was a slow, steady process, but the results were undeniable. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the neighborhood come alive with activity, I realized I hadn't made a single enemy. In fact, I'd become the very thing the previous leadership had been, a leader in the community. But it wasn't about power for me. It was about progress, about proving that what we once were could be reclaimed, that what we once lost could be regained, and that what we once dreamed of could still be achieved. Their faces, etched with years of toil and neglect, were now mirrors reflecting my own journey. A testament to the power of resilience, hard work, and an unwavering commitment to one's roots. We may have started with different dreams, Mr. Williams and I, but it was his absence that gave me the opportunity to prove that patience and perseverance can turn even the most challenging situation into a canvas for growth, dignity, and community. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have walked away, leaving the mockery and betrayal unchallenged? Would you have retaliated in anger, letting emotion dictate action? Or would you, like me, have chosen a quiet, deliberate path, transforming insult into leverage and humiliation into a lesson of dignity and responsibility? There is no single answer. The choice lies in values, patience, courage, and the vision of what you want your life to reflect. Forgiveness, justice, or quiet reclamation. Each path carries its own cost and its own reward. I won't pretend my path was easy. The risk was immense, the patience required exhausting. But the reward was more than financial. It was the restoration of story and the transformation of relationships that had long been toxic. I turned silence into action, scorn into leverage, and derision into respect. So I leave this with you. Reflect, discuss, debate. What matters more, punishment or growth, humiliation or dignity? And if the roles were reversed, how would you act? I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's been supporting this story so far. Your comments, your likes, they really help keep me motivated. So let's get back to the story. As I laid out my findings, the smiles faded, the pleasantries died, their casual posture shifted to rigid defense. I started with the finances, tracing the misappropriation of funds, item by item, invoice by invoice. I showed how decisions that benefited them directly were made with disregard for the community's welfare. I presented evidence of hidden agendas, of backroom deals that lined their pockets, while neglecting the very real needs of our town. Facts, cold, hard facts, the kind that cannot be refuted, only acknowledged. Their attempts to interrupt were polite but transparent in their desperation. I gave them space to respond, expecting denials, perhaps some recriminations, but not one of them could refute the mountain of evidence I had laid out. Instead, I found anger, frustration, and a dawning realization that they had been outmaneuvered. They tried to shift the narrative, to portray my meticulous research as an attack. But their efforts rang hollow, their words lacked conviction, their body language screamed their true feelings. Then came the second part of my presentation, the social contract, the promises they had made and broken. I detailed each instance where they had failed to uphold their end of the bargain, from neglected infrastructure to ignored safety concerns. I spoke about the erosion of trust, the sense of abandonment that had crept into our community. I showed how their actions, or more accurately their inactions, had eroded the very fabric of our town. There were gasps at some of the revelations. Some residents, eyes wide with shock, leaned forward eager to hear more. Others, faces pale, struggled to reconcile the image they had held of their leaders with the stark reality I was presenting. A few, however, averted their gaze, shamefaced, their silence deafening. By the time I finished, the room was silent, the air thick with the weight of my presentation. There were no angry outbursts, no indignant denials, only the sound of dawning understanding. It was then that the full extent of my victory sank in. It wasn't just about exposing their wrongdoings. It was about planting seeds of doubt, forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions. In that silent room, surrounded by the evidence I had painstakingly gathered, they were no longer the untouchable elite. They were just people, flawed, fallible human beings, who had strayed from their path. But as the silence stretched on, I knew that wouldn't be enough. I had laid out the truth, but the most important part, the action, was still left to be decided. So I concluded, I've presented you with the facts. Now it's up to you to decide what course of action we take next. And with that, I left them to their deliberations. Outside the town hall, I felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of months of work. I had done my part. Now it was up to the community, up to them to decide what path to take, whether to continue down the road of complacency or to start a new chapter of accountability and fairness. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake off a sense of unease. The fight was far from over. The confrontation had shifted the power dynamics, but the true test, the response of the community, was still to come. Would they rally around the ideals of transparency and accountability? Or would they shrink back into the shadows of fear and apathy? Only time would tell. And with that cliffhanger, we'll end tonight's episode. If you find yourself on the side of justice, eager for the community to rise up, drop a comment below with the hashtag #TeamJustice. Let's see how many of you are ready to stand for fairness and accountability. Remember, every voice counts. Also, don't forget to hit the like button if you haven't already. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking questions. The answers, like the truth, will set us free. My name is Anonymous. I'm a writer. Let me tell you a story. The mahogany door to the conference room bore the nameplate board of directors in gold lettering. It was a symbol of authority, of privilege, a barrier between the decisions that shaped our lives and the people who made them. But today, I would breach that divide. As I stepped into the room, their faces, etched with the confidence of years of unchallenged control, turned to me briefly before returning to their animated conversation. They didn't need to look twice. They knew who I was, and they knew why I was there. They'd known for months. Really, ever since I started digging into our building's finances. Thank you for meeting with me. I began, placing a folder on the table between us. I've taken the time to review the last 5 years of budgets, property acquisitions, and maintenance records. There are discrepancies that can no longer be overlooked. One of the board members laughed, a high, brittle sound meant to dismiss me. Discrepancies, you think a few papers make you an authority here. I ignored the interruption, maintaining my calm tone. I'm not here to claim authority. I'm here to ensure accountability. Look at this ledger. Notice how funds allocated for repairs to community property were marked complete, yet invoices show no work was done. See this acquisition? The property title was transferred twice without proper notice. These are not minor errors. They're clear breaches of procedure. Another member leaned forward, his eyebrows drawn. Are you suggesting we acted improperly? I'm suggesting we review the facts carefully, I replied. Every statement I have is documented, verifiable, and legally binding. I believe transparency benefits everyone, including the leadership. For a moment, silence filled the room, punctuated only by the rustle of paper as they glanced at the documents I had laid out. Faces that had been animated now wore expressions of mild surprise, quickly replaced by visible discomfort. The confident air they carried for years was now thin, fragile. "You're trying to embarrass us," one of them finally sputtered, voice rising. "This is a public forum. You can't." I held up a hand, steady, quiet. "This is not about embarrassment. It's about accuracy. It's about responsibility. You have the opportunity to correct these oversights, to restore trust. The facts don't lie, and the evidence speaks louder than denial." Another attempted to interrupt, but I continued, each sentence deliberate, each point undeniable. "There are multiple instances of what appear to be inflated invoices for services rendered. This one, for instance, shows a payment of $10,000 for landscaping, yet the work done was minimal. A few bushes trimmed and some grass cut. It's reasonable to assume that this amount is excessive and may represent misappropriation of funds. Additionally, we have a record of significant repairs that were approved but never executed. Funds were set aside, yet work orders show that contractors were never hired. Does anyone care to explain this?" Their faces were strained, their eyes darting between me and the documents on the table. "Where did the money go?" one finally asked, the veneer of composure cracking. "That," I said quietly, "is what we need to discover." The weight of the situation pressed down on us. I could feel their unease, their struggle to reconcile years of complacency with the stark reality laid out before us. In that room, I saw fear replace arrogance. It was a powerful, unsettling sight. The meeting stretched on, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension. I went over line by line, invoice by invoice, pointing out anomalies and potential improprieties. I wasn't looking for confrontation, but the implications were clear. As the meeting drew to a close, I stood up. "This isn't over," I stated firmly, folding the documents, placing them back in the folder. "I suggest you consult with legal counsel. You have questions? I have answers. Until then, consider this your first warning." I left the room without another word, the echo of their gasps following me. Later, walking down the corridor, I heard shouts and angry voices. I smiled faintly. Sometimes the most potent weapon is the truth. When wielded patiently, persistently, it becomes a battering ram that shatters even the densest walls of denial. Have you ever felt like speaking up was pointless? Like your voice wouldn't make a dent in the world? If you're nodding along, if you've ever been the quiet kid sitting in a room full of noise, I want you to know this. Your quiet strength can become your most powerful weapon. Here's what happened. In the days that followed the confrontation, the neighborhood began to shift in ways I hadn't dared to imagine when I first started this journey. The leadership, once seemingly untouchable, faltered under the weight of scrutiny and undeniable facts. Meetings that had been filled with confident proclamations now carried tension and unease. Members, who had once projected control and superiority, now spoke in quieter tones, careful with each word, aware that every move was being observed. Their authority crumbled, not through chaos or aggression, but through the steady application of transparency and evidence. Neighbors began recalibrating their loyalties, quietly discussing the discrepancies and the board's repeated mismanagement. People I had barely known before came forward with support, sharing their own observations and experiences, and subtly siding with truth over tradition. The community, once content to let appearances dictate respect, now paid attention to actions and results. Trust had shifted, and with it, the power dynamics of the neighborhood began to tilt toward fairness and accountability. It wasn't about me versus them. It was about facts versus fiction. And facts, though slow, always catch up. This quiet revolution was uncomfortable for some, particularly those whose power had been derived from manipulating perceptions and exploiting rules for personal gain. Their downfall wasn't spectacular, but the quiet unraveling of their authority was its own kind of justice. They couldn't silence me because my actions were rooted in the community's best interest, backed by meticulous documentation and free from any personal malice. My strategy might have seemed passive at times, but it was far from weakness. I wasn't waiting for lightning to strike. I was gathering the kind of power that doesn't rely on brute force or grand gestures, but on steadfastness, truth, and a deep understanding of systems. I turned the wheels of accountability, set the legal and ethical standards in motion, and then let them do their work. Let me tell you why this matters. We live in a world that often applauds loud, brash voices while overlooking the power of quiet, calculated moves. It's easy to dismiss someone who speaks softly, assuming they lack conviction or strength. But those who speak too loudly to cover up weaknesses are the ones who crumble when faced with scrutiny. I learned that the quietest voices can leave the loudest echoes if you listen closely enough. Let's talk about consequences. They say the quiet life is the life of a fool, but maybe it's also the life of a strategist. Consequences unfolded methodically. Every mismanaged project that had once been ignored now received scrutiny. The records, the acquisitions, the financial oversights, they were all reviewed officially, corrected and brought into compliance. The system itself, which had been exploited by those who assumed invisibility granted immunity, was now functioning as intended. There was no chaos. No personal vendetta, only the natural correction of accountability. The laws and procedures I had relied upon were doing their work, and the board could do nothing but comply. Think about it. When everyone plays by the same rules, when the foundation of fairness is established, those who try to cut corners or exploit the system get caught. It's not a complicated formula, but it's surprisingly powerful. In the face of these unfolding consequences, the bravado, the bluster, the attempts to sway public perception through manipulation or intimidation, they all fell flat. They had no ground to stand on. I won't say it was easy. Being underestimated is a heavy burden to carry, but the reward of proving them wrong was even greater. This journey taught me the value of quiet strength, of letting facts and systems speak, and of staying true to principles even when they weren't popular. It's a lesson I hope you'll embrace too, because in a world that loves to be loud, your quietest moves can make the loudest statements. If you're going through something unfair, if you feel the urge to speak up but fear being ignored, remember, you don't need a loud voice if you've got facts on your side. You aren't need to be the loudest person in the room, if your actions can speak for themselves. Quiet strength isn't passive, it's proactive, it's strategic. It's letting the truth unfold, letting the facts catch up, and letting the world see that sometimes the quietest voices can shake the foundations. I am very happy to share with you today's message. A few years ago, I embarked on a journey to reclaim my birth home, a property that had been unjustly taken from my family. The road was long and arduous, marked by challenges and moments that tested my resolve. Today I stand before you not just as a victor, but as someone who has learned profound lessons about life, justice, and the complexities of human nature. When we started this journey, there were voices of skepticism and doubt. Many believed the fight for our birth home was a lost cause, but I knew I had to try. It wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about restoring a piece of my heritage, my identity. Throughout the process, I encountered situations that could have easily pushed me to retaliate, to lash out, to mirror the behavior of those who seemed determined to hold me down. There were times when anger and frustration threatened to consume me. Remember, I grew up in a rough neighborhood. Fair play wasn't part of our vocabulary. Winning meant taking whatever you could get and leaving others to deal with the fallout. But I knew that responding with anger wouldn't solve anything. It would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and resentment. There was one incident, though, that stands out as a pivotal moment. When I uncovered a shocking truth about my father's death, deceit, betrayal, and attempts to tarnish his memory. If there was ever a moment for me to give into anger, to abandon the pursuit of the truth, it was then. But I resisted. I decided to face the ugliness head-on, to expose it and allow the healing process to begin. That's when I made a vow to myself. If I won my birth home back, it wouldn't be a hollow victory tainted by the same tactics that had caused so much suffering. I promised myself that if I succeeded, I would use every lesson I'd learned to steer my family and community toward a better path. Now, after years of relentless effort, the fight is finally coming to an end, and I want to take a moment to reflect on what this victory means, not just for me, but for the larger community. You see, if you've been following this story, you know that the fight for our birth home was never just about us. It was about challenging a system that seemed intent on keeping people like me, people with my background, down. It was about exposing the prejudice and discrimination that had deep roots in our community. And here's the thing. As the fight intensified, so did the personal attacks, the slander, and the rumors. They tried to break me, to make me into the very thing they accused me of being. They painted me as someone driven solely by vengeance, forgetting that I had endured years of humiliation and struggle. But I remained steadfast. I never wavered from my truth, even when faced with opposition that seemed insurmountable. As the battle raged on, I took a different approach. Instead of allowing myself to be dragged into the mud, I channeled my experiences into motivation. I immersed myself in the fight, pouring every ounce of energy into proving them wrong. And then the day came when the truth began to unfold. One by one, the lies were exposed, revealing the ugliness that had been concealed for so long. It was a hard-won battle, but the victory was undeniable. The skepticisms, the doubts, and the accusations that had once echoed loudly were replaced by shock and disbelief. Those who had written me off, those who had bet against me, suddenly found themselves on shaky ground. As the narrative shifted, I knew that my purpose extended beyond just reclaiming my birth home. I realized that the real test lay in what would come next. The true measure of impact would be in what lasted, not in the immediate victories, no matter how satisfying it. So, as we stand here today, let us remember that the fight for what is right is rarely easy. It demands unwavering commitment, resilience, and the courage to stay true to oneself. It means choosing hope over despair, unity over division, and love over hate. Today, as I reflect on the journey thus far, I am filled with gratitude for every challenge, every setback, and every moment of triumph. They have all shaped me into the person I am today. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and as we move forward together, let us carry the lessons learned and the strength gained from the fight for what lasts. For it is in the endurance of our spirit that we discover the true meaning of victory. If you've been following this story, drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because every journey, no matter how challenging, can lead to triumph. Forgiveness is often spoken about as the path to inner peace. But what does that truly mean? Does it require forgetting, condoning, or absolving the other person of their actions? No, not at all. It doesn't require any of those things. In my case, I didn't push for reconciliation, nor did I need it to validate the choices I had made. What mattered was that the cycle of dismissal, ridicule, and ignorance had ended. Instead, it was replaced by dignity, fairness, and accountability. My sister nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and it was enough. We had closed the loop without fanfare, a quiet closure that spoke volumes. This neighborhood is safer, stronger, and more transparent because of the path I chose. And in that knowledge, I found peace. As I walked away from that moment, I couldn't help but reflect on the choices each of us faces when confronted with wrongdoing, dismissal, or betrayal. Would you forgive and rebuild, or would you hold your distance and protect yourself? There is no single right answer, and the debate itself is what shapes character, community, and legacy. We can't always choose the events that unfold around us, but we can choose our response. Do we react with anger and resentment, perpetuating a cycle of negativity, or do we strive for understanding and growth, even if it doesn't erase the pain of the past? Pain will always exist, but we have the power to choose how long we let it define us. My path led me to confront my sister's actions, not for the sake of punishment, but for the sake of healing, both for myself and for her. In doing so, I didn't condone what she had done, but I acknowledged the reality of our situation. We had reached an impasse, and the only way forward was through understanding and empathy. Empathy isn't a sign of weakness. It asks the strength to understand that we all make mistakes and the courage to extend a hand in forgiveness. But it's also essential to recognize that forgiveness is a personal journey. It doesn't require the other person to apologize, to change, or even to admit wrongdoing. It's a conscious choice we make for ourselves, a way to release the burden of anger and resentment. It's a recognition that while we can't change the past, we have the power to shape our future. That's all I had hoped for, not as a victory, but as a chance to start anew. The gate was closed, but the path continued, and as I walked along it, I felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by the hope of a shared future. A future where we could acknowledge the hurt, learn from it, and move forward together. Of course, if you've been following this journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are coming, each one exploring the line between patience and justice, quiet resolve and visible action. The next story will take you to a different neighborhood, a new set of challenges, and a lesson that might resonate even closer to home. Closure doesn't always mean finality. Sometimes it's the quiet acknowledgement that a chapter has ended, while the questions, reflections, and choices remain open, waiting for us to step forward and write the next one. That is the balance I have learned. The gate is closed, but the path continues.